The Hypnobirthing Toolkit is a complete hypnobirthing and birth preparation course helping you to go into the birth of your baby with confidence and positivity. It's completely self-paced with pre-recorded videos, presentations, audios, PDFs, plus monthly live classes. It's a more affordable and flexible way to learn hypnobirthing and help you have the positive birth experience you deserve. Follow the link in the description below to begin your positive birth journey today. Hello and welcome to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. My name is Ellie Waddington. I'm a hypnobirthing teacher, antenatal instructor and positive birth coach, and I'm here to help you go into the birth of your baby with a positive mindset. Every week I share my top tips, advice and amazing birth stories to help you go from fearful and anxious about your birth to positive and confident. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and let's get into this episode. Hey gorgeous mama, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This week I am joined by Samantha Ray from the Perinatal Academy, and she is talking to us all about the challenges faced by older mums in our maternity system.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. So I'm Sam and I live in East Kent, and I have a daughter who is 5, and she really is the reason that I now do what I do, which is an antenatal teacher. So I have my own independent antenatal business where I support families as they start or grow their own families. And I absolutely love it. I also, because I love it so much, last year launched the Perinatal Academy, which is a training academy to enable other people to be able to train and become antenatal educators or birth workers, or just to be able to support people in their communities and wherever they want to take it. So I launched that last year. It's going really well, and it means that hundreds and hundreds of more families are going to end up being supported through doing what I do. So it's really incredible work. Before I had my daughter, I would never have dreamed in a million years that I would be doing a job like this. I had a corporate life, and then of course I birthed her and everything changed, and that kind of leads me to here and what I'm doing, and I couldn't be more grateful for it.
Wow, what a journey. I'm so excited to get stuck into this conversation. So we are talking today about older mums, and I'm going to keep using quotation marks because I don't really like to say older mums, but you know what I mean, and you're going to explain this really well in a minute. Yeah, so define to us, what is an older mum in quotation marks?
So in quotation marks, older mum actually is probably one of the kind of nicer ways to describe it, because the language around women and people having babies later in life is kind of quite horrendous, actually. So you can be called elderly, has been used. I know. Advanced is used a lot and still used, certainly medically. And also what I was called, which is geriatric. So I was a geriatric mum.
Yeah. You're geriatric. Oh my God.
Geriatric mums. And that was me at the grand old age of 38, because that's how old I was when I had my daughter. Now, it was 5 years ago, so they've moved that cutting point. So you became a geriatric mum at 37, but now it's, are you ready? The really old age of 40 now, right? So now when you're 40, they are, hopefully, you shouldn't be hearing that language as much as, say, I heard it only 5 years ago. It shouldn't be used at all. And you can ask for it not to be used if you are over 40 years old. So once you get to 45, you would be classified as advanced kind of maternal age. And that's 45 plus. And what we'll talk about today is that there's kind of very different, it does feel like quite a different category age wise if you're considering having a baby.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm just shocked at being called geriatric mum. I mean, what? No. That's rude. That's so rude.
It is really rude. It's a ridiculous label as well, because as we know, I mean, I know we're changing from a societal point of view anyway about age, and the amount of families starting later in life is on the rise. rise. Like every year we're seeing more and more babies being born to women over the age of 5. There's lots of benefits to having a baby later in life. And I think we definitely talk more about the potential challenges that are around having a baby later in life. And actually, before this podcast, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go onto Google, right? And I'm just going to Google pregnant over 40. And also I support so many families personally through my antenatal business every year. And honestly, the kind of age group that I'm seeing is late 20s to early 40s. That's what I'm saying. There's always a mix of that with every single course I do. So the over 40 bracket is just increasing all the time. So I just Googled pregnant over 40. And the first things you see are, the first thing that comes up says, but later in life pregnancies can also affect the health of your baby, even if you don't have any health concerns. So immediately someone over 40 is probably thinking, oh, just being pregnant over 40 could harm my baby. This one's quite funny. Pregnant women over 40 are, and then in bold, very likely to have a big baby. So we do see an increase in kind of the size for some, but actually it's a bit more common as you get older to have a baby on a smaller size. But anyway, regardless, not helpful. The truth about pregnancy over 40 just shows a really shocking miscarriage rate, but nothing else. That's the first thing. And then any pregnancy over 40 is considered high risk. And they were the first 5 things popped up as soon as I put it into Google. So how are you going to feel as somebody that's 40 years old, that's now pregnant, wants to, overjoyed about having that baby, and this is what you're faced with immediately when you start to look into your own pregnancy journey?
That's nuts, because we know from all the other labels that you can possibly be given. Being given a label is not helpful in pregnancy. That really affects your mindset. But also, with all due respect, if you're already going into that appointment, you're already pregnant. Like, you cannot change the fact that you're already pregnant. You can't change the fact that you're over 40. Like, being given a high risk label and being told you are at risk of this, you can't do anything about it. How is that helpful at all?
Yeah, it's not helpful. And that label also, you're just automatically high risk now. So quite often you will end up being consultant led. And actually, you might find that if this is somebody that's already had a baby, or they've turned 41, and for example, they're now being told that they need to take aspirin every day because there's the risk of blood clots is higher, or they're going to have extra growth scans because of the risk that their baby's not going to grow in the way they want them to grow. And 2 years ago, they may have had a baby, or at like 37 or 38, they didn't have any of this. And now just because they've turned 40, they're walking into a pregnancy that now feels potentially unsafe for them, and also feeling really anxious and worried, which is, it's the opposite of how anyone deserves or needs to feel when they're pregnant. So each of these risks, there's truth in the fact that there are potential challenges and complications when you are over in births. There is that, and they should be taken seriously, like, absolutely. But as with maternity care in general, putting that label on a woman just because of her age and not taking her entire health into account is really problematic, because we know that age is just a number. There are some really unhealthy 25-year-olds out there, and there are plenty of people way older than me that are way healthier than I am. So it can be very frustrating to all of a sudden be put under consultant care, for example, when you are a really fit and healthy 42-year-old that's having their first baby.
Yeah, and it seems like as with a lot of what we see in maternity care, there's a lot of, we're going to do this just in case. We're going to do this because there's a slight risk increase, not because there is actually an emergency happening.
Totally. It's all about minimizing risk, of where there's obviously a place for that. But, you can take the example of inducing a baby for a woman over 40 earlier than 40 weeks, because the risk of stillbirth does increase for women over 40 once they go over 2 weeks. It also increases for women between the age of 20 to 24 also, so it isn't just only about you turn 40 and, all these terrible things might happen specifically just in that age group. But, induction is routinely offered to a woman over 40 because of the risks of her age. But are the risks of the induction actually being discussed? So the risks of the induction itself to the woman and the baby, way? And I would say no, not enough. And it's fine to offer these things if the risks on both sides are being given at the same time, so the woman or birthing person and their family can make an informed choice. And more often it's just, you're over 40, you're high risk, loads of monitoring. So basically that fear mongering can start early days. So by the time you get to 40 weeks or you get to 38 weeks, you've been constantly going into hospitals, constantly having that sort of language being used. So is there coercion in there? I would say quite possibly.
Yeah, whether it's intentional or not, there is a certain, you're being led down a certain direction. And you're absolutely right, that is going to happen. I think, we talk about risk and making informed decisions. A really important thing to note is absolute risk versus relative risk. Being told by your healthcare professional that the stillbirth increases by this, that's all well and good, but what are those risks? Because often it can be portrayed the risk is suddenly massive when you get to 42 weeks, when actually it's only a tiny increase that actually isn't that significant to some people. Some people may consider it a massive leap, but others may not.
Yeah, and actually, I've got an example of exactly that with some stats from 2020. They are stillbirth stats, which is obviously the most devastating complication, and most of the risks are all trying to avoid that. So again, have to be respected, but ultimately have to be delved into, dug into, just to get the right level of information. So the highest rate of stillbirth is still in women over 40, but that is 5.5 per thousand. Under 40 is 3.8 per thousand.
So that's still less than 1%. Is that my maths?
Right, I'm terrible at maths, so I cannot. It's small. It's small. And then the 20 to 24 age bracket is 4.5 per thousand. This is exactly what you're saying. It's very different if you're going up a 0.1% to if a risk increases from 20% to 70%. It's totally different. But when you're just being constantly told that stillbirth increases, and some of that language, like when you just even Google, then you're having that kind of repeated to you within a medical setting. You must see a consultant now because it's too dangerous for you to only see a midwife. It's no wonder that I feel like that a kind of medically assisted birth is the only way that can birth their baby. As I said, things do change. Things do look a little different over the age of 5 because the numbers around those sort of risk and miscarriage risks and things actually do increase kind of quite significantly. But anywhere between 35 and 40, which is still considered 45, which is still considered older, advanced or geriatric in my case, it isn't as significant as it's being presented, or there's a lot of unnecessary fear around it. Whereas I would urge anyone, doesn't matter what age you are actually, anyone to totally understand the risks that are being put in front of you. Your healthcare team, if you're going to be birthing in a maternity setting, their job is to minimize risk as much as possible, but you have to understand everything about that risk. You have to ask questions, and you need to be able to make an informed choice about what you're comfortable with. And the other thing that's really important to note as well is that I think we're always trying to get to a no risk situation. This is a risk, and this is, if you do this, there's no risk. Well, that is impossible, because me sitting in this room doing this podcast with you, there's a risk that the ceiling might come in, there's my chair might break, I might hit my head. There's risks all the time, and that isn't communicated well enough, I don't think, either, of saying which risk are you more comfortable with. And you can only make that decision if you have all the information about what's being presented.
And this is so true. I was having this exact conversation with someone regarding VBAC the other day. Is, ladies wanting a VBAC, they're being told this thing about their increased chance of uterine rupture. But when you look at what the numbers actually are, you're at greater chance in the UK of crashing your car on the way to the hospital to have your C-section than you would be to stay at home and have your vaginal birth, And you're right in that we're told the risks of this and the things that we're trying to prevent, but the thing that you're using to try and prevent that, like the C-section or the induction, they're not the savior. They're not the risk-free savior that that is often being portrayed as, you know?
Totally. And actually, realistically, they bring their own risks, which are not usually discussed unless you proactively ask that as a parent. So, that discussion of, there's increased risk of stillbirth after 40 weeks when you're over 40. So we would suggest that you have an induction. Okay, great. I understand the why, but what are the risks to me and my baby of having that induction, of which there are many, so as I said earlier, that's not offered up as part of that conversation. You might be totally comfortable with all of those risks and decide, yes, induction is the right thing for me to do. That is what I want to do. But you just can't possibly make that decision if you don't know, or you're just frightened. And the other thing that we do, I think most of us, when we are expecting babies, is that we just want everything to be okay. So, what we ask is, if the baby's okay, then do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. But we need to change that narrative. We need to be mother and birthing person focused first. And we don't do enough of that here either, actually. I think with anyone who's birthing, but specifically if you're in a high risk category, of which you will be if you're over 40, is that you have to, I always say, take your birth by the horns. And you've got to actually be very proactive and think, well, this is the birth that I would really like, and let's look into how can we make that happen. If we're not able to make it happen that way, why not? Understanding why you may not be able to have your first preferences can contribute hugely to how you feel after the birth. So when you want something and you're not able to have it for a medical reason, understanding that is much easier to process. We wanted that. We were not able to have that because we looked at all the risks and we understood that the risks were significant, or we weren't comfortable. So we made that decision. We were okay with that decision to go to our next preferences, rather than coming out the other side and being like, well, we really wanted that. We were told we couldn't have it. We don't know why we couldn't have it. I think actually what that leaves parents feeling is like they failed, and they haven't failed. How no one can fail at birth. They'll feel that way. And that in itself can have repens for how you feel quite a long way down the line, realistically.
Yeah, and you can only kind of find yourself in that position of empowerment when you truly know all your options. When you get yourself informed on all the possibilities and everything that everything entails, then that's when you can feel properly informed and empowered. And even if your plan A doesn't go exactly how you want it, you're not left in the middle of labor when you're exhausted and emotional, and there are strangers around you. You're not left making those decisions, trying to figure out what you want in that moment. You've already made those decisions. You're already confident in your choice, and that's the positive birth experience that we all want, is staying empowered and making your own choices all the way through.
Definitely. And I've supported a few women that are in their late 40s with their pregnancies, and I've seen how a few have absolutely decided that an elective cesarean is the right thing for them, and that's wonderful, because they've really taken that time to get to that decision. They haven't felt pressurized. But on the flip side of that, there's been a couple that have had a really difficult kind of pathway with it, and again, it's about the care that you receive from your healthcare team, and most of which are wonderful and very supportive. But as you said at the beginning, if somebody arrives to you wanting your support and they're already pregnant, making them feel like they shouldn't have got pregnant in the first place is not a good place to start. And I feel that there can be some judgment sometimes for older mothers and people, which just has no place in maternity care at all.
And that's the same for a lot of high risk labels. Again, I'm using quotation marks here.
Yeah.
But it's becoming increasingly easy to receive a high risk label in our maternity care. And lots of those are things that aren't immediately changeable, or they are completely outside of your control, but you are made to feel guilty for it.
Definitely. Things like your size that's a huge one, of, having a high BMI. And, we all know that BMIs are, I won't swear, but they're rubbish, BMI is rubbish, but still, can cause so many problems for people if their BMI is reading a number that is now deemed that they're high risk. And it's a really tough place to be when you feel like you've just got to start battling from the moment you walk into a midwife, or I would would say more a consultant's office, really. But I think the positive thing as well to look at is that there are more and more and more babies being born to older families every single year. And I think because of that, the language is changing and the support that's being given is changing. And any kind of potential stigma that I know we certainly would have had like a decade or so ago about having an older mum is changing. We're seeing a lot of kind of, I would say, like women in their late 40s having babies thanks to having fertility treatment. So, you know, that's also happening so much more, which is, you know, changing the dynamics really of what families look like. And, you know, I think that should be celebrated. Like, I did not feel like an old mum when I was 38. I don't think anyone would really think that now even, and it was only 5 years ago. So I think that actually the change is happening a little bit more rapidly than other, for example, take size, for example. We're still really struggling around the stigma and the judgment attached to that. Like, we've got a long way to go. And with many other things that we're kind of prejudiced about in our maternity system that are really difficult to kind of make that change. But I do think the change is kind of happening with older families. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and we find with a lot of things in our maternity care, policies and guidelines, they can change like right up here, and it takes a long time for that to trickle down throughout the rest of where it's actually being delivered. And it's a real lottery. You get some healthcare professionals that are immediately on it and they stay up to date with the latest guidelines immediately, and others that perhaps are a little bit slower to implement those changes.
Definitely. And actually, kind of interestingly, we don't have any national guidelines for how to support women and people over 40 having babies. We don't have guidelines for it. And in a way, I mean, I kind of understand that, because it's like, how do you have guidelines around anything to do with birth, really, because everybody is completely different. So healthcare professionals are actually having to just try and work within guidelines. So, for example, preeclampsia. So there is a kind of the risk increases moderately over 40 for preeclampsia. So they have to reference preeclampsia itself, take that and look at that separately. And then they look at blood clots and then they look at that separately. So they're also having to try and like piece together kind of care, making sure that they are ticking all those boxes to minimize risk, which is ultimately what they need to do, sometimes to the detriment of the birthing person. But yeah, we don't really have any. We don't have a nice list to say. And in fact, maybe it's better we didn't, because if we did have a list for over 40, it'd probably be like, don't do this, don't do that, this will happen, don't do that. It would probably be even more restrictive than it is already. But
it's that double-edged sword, isn't it? Kind of, you want more research being done into it so that they do have these policies and they can better support these women. But at the same time, you're right in that suddenly you have this tick list created of, you know, criteria that you have to fill in order to get a particular birth or something like that.
It is. And it's also really important for people to know that these guidelines are not like, they're written for the healthcare team, and they're not actually written for you as an individual. And because something's in the guidelines, it doesn't mean you have to agree to it. Now, I am not saying for 1 second that you ignore the advice of your healthcare professional. I'd say it's the opposite. You actually listen really intently and ask loads of questions, but then also look for somebody else that can support you to sometimes make sense of it all. And that there's 2 really amazing books always recommend, and that is In Your Own Time by Dr. Sarah Wickham, and then also What's Right for Me by Dr. Sarah Wickham. And again, it's, being like having common sense about, are you a 40-year-old mother or are you a 46-year-old mother, and looking into just, that specific age bracket, but also your own health and well-being. As I said before, I think for anyone looking to try and have a baby or, grow their families or find themselves pregnant. I mean, I hate saying between 35 and 40, but, in their 40s, I would say. I just don't count 30s. I just find that really young now. Maybe that's my bias because I was 38. But, the important things actually, if you're in your 40s and you're you're trying to conceive or you're pregnant is by just being as healthy as possible. So there are some things like when you get into your 40s, there's a possibility you may have some underlying health conditions like diabetes or some blood pressure issues that are more likely as you get older, than if you're in your 20s, early 30s. So go and have a check, go and have your health checked out, get on top of it, but like get that actual tick of a bill of clean health. And if something does come up, well, then you can start managing that, early on. Don't smoke, limit your alcohol intake, move a lot, doing lots of walking and cardio is great. Stretching your body. Like I do feel like for some people that if they're not yogis in their 40s, you can feel a bit creakier than like when you're younger, but moving and stretching, all that stuff that's going to really help your body birth a baby, eat well. There's some fantastic supplements that can really help you with fertility and early pregnancy. Wild nutrition is amazing for that. It's more about focusing, and unless you have, that you have a health condition, you're aware of that and you're managing that. It's more about, you should be worrying about your health in general than focusing your worry on your, and that's what I would kind of urge anyone who finds themselves older, is just to really look after yourself, and that actually directly lower some of those risks of preeclampsia, of stillbirth, those that your own health individually can do more, to help that than sitting at home and stressing and worrying about your next.
That is such great advice. And I think we're all very quick to look for medical solutions. And these are just really simple things that you can do yourself at home. They don't take any effort. Well, sorry, maybe a bit of effort. I mean, yoga is a little bit, but a little bit of effort, but minimal effort. And these are just things that you can start doing yourself to start minimizing those risks. So that's really great advice.
Totally. I think we, quite often when we become pregnant, we can surrender. Almost, it's like we're surrendering ourselves over to, being looked after by somebody else. And I think we really need to change that narrative. Again, if you have a health condition, then absolutely, we need our healthcare professionals to support us with that. And, if you have got something like that, then you manage that in the way it needs to be managed. But actually, it's our own responsibilities to look after our bodies and prepare to birth our babies in that way. And, when we look at it like that, it can also add to being really, really empowering, rather than just, oh, I'm pregnant now, I just need to do what the midwife tells me to do. It's about taking responsibility, and that can just feel really, really good when you're doing that, especially if you do end up in some sort of high risk category, knowing yourself that you are doing everything that you can possibly do, to keep yourself nice and healthy is just really positive. Not always easy. It's not easy. And especially when you're pregnant, it's not always easy to cook nutritious food or get out and get moving. I was addicted to applying spaghetti hoops, so much so that I thought my daughter was going to come out orange. My husband would try and tentatively say to me, do you want me to make dinner? I could make a nice stir fry tonight, or I was like, no, give me the hoops on toast. So it isn't always easy. And I'm probably not following my own advice, to be totally real. It's not always easy. Even if you can just bring some of that into your life, it will massively.
Yeah, and that helps your mental well-being as well. All those things are so beneficial for your mental health as well, and your mood and your mindset, not just your physical health.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's loads of support out there for older mums as well. There's loads of books you can read. There's a few things that you can find that can really kind of help you if you need it, and help you feel confident about carrying and birthing a baby when you're a bit older. So yeah, there's lots out there to help you if you are finding that things are feeling a bit stressful, or the messaging that you're getting is negative, because that's a huge thing. And you did a podcast today, didn't you, about the negativity and that messaging. And that is another thing that I would really urge anyone, is to just be really mindful about what they're looking at, what they're reading, who's talking to them, who wants to share their stories with them about, oh, I know someone who was an older mum and had a terrible time. No, boundaries are, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have a really positive, powerful, healthy experience birthing a baby into your 40s. There isn't. So it's about surrounding yourself with that messaging and blocking out the other stuff that's not serving you.
Yeah, and this is where hypnobirthing really comes into its own, when you are put in that high risk, again, quotation marks, high risk category, and you do need to protect your mind mindset. And you are so right about the messages you're taking in and the people around you. And it's so easy just to kind of sit there and listen to it, and you get negged out by it. And you absolutely do have to take responsibility for your own mindset in that situation. If you have people around you that are constantly telling you, oh, you're too old to have a baby, oh, things are going to go wrong and all this, and you have to put your foot down, you have to put those boundaries in place.
Yes, you do. You absolutely do. And it's not always easy to do that, but it makes such a difference. And, hopefully, as I said earlier, I think things are changing. If you look at, I hate talking about celebrity culture because it brings a lot of toxicity with it. But actually, for the first time, I think we are just seeing women, in the public eye having babies, whether they've had some, fertility assistance with that or it's happened spontaneously. We're starting to see women having babies much later in life, which does help. It does help change that narrative. And it's interesting at the school gates, I just see there's lots of other women that are similar age to me. And I know it's different for everybody, but I look back and I think, God, how could I have had a baby at 24? I wouldn't have known. I couldn't look after myself. I know some incredible young mums, but again, we should just never reserve judgment for anybody, and everybody deserves, excellent care with no judgment, regardless of their age. And I think, before I forget, what I will say is that if you unfortunately do come across any judgment or anything from your healthcare provider, of which hopefully you won't, because so many are just really supportive, but if you do find that somebody has been judgmental or made comments, or actually you just don't like the vibe of that person in your pregnancy, then you can ask to not see that person anymore. And I would really, really urge you to do that. That is something that I did in my pregnancy, because I did have a midwife who was very judgmental about my age, and in my hormonal emotional state made me cry twice. And I came home and said to my husband, I'm not going to have any more appointments. He was like, no, we're not going to do that, but we need to change and get someone else. And I got someone else, and my whole experience then as an older, in quotation marks, mum completely changed. It was, you are free to do whatever you want, but here's the choices for you. This is why we're giving them to you. Go away, have a look into it. My age was never really brought up as the reason why these things were happening that often. Whereas initially it was all, well, because you're 38, we've got to do this. Well, because you're 38, we've got to do that. And it was just constantly being brought up. So yeah, we changed. And, thank goodness we did, because there was another life where I probably wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have known to have done that. And I would have had to have gone back to other appointments and had a horrendous time that could have even changed my birth outcome, like no joke, So you can absolutely do that. If you are feeling like you're not comfortable with that person for whatever reason, you can just request to not see that person and see someone else. It actually happens a lot, because you must put yourself first.
Do you think your age made you a little bit more comfortable with asserting yourself? So I know that myself, as a 20-year-old girl, there's no way that I would have ever questioned a healthcare professional. But I had my first baby at 28, my second at 31. I felt much more comfortable advocating for myself. And I think as you do get older and you get more life experience, you do feel more comfortable questioning people and advocating for yourself.
Yeah, I do think that there is an element of that. I think people are different. I have some women that are older in my class that I can see are going to have a tough time with it. But with that age and experience, I definitely do think there's a confidence that just comes from age, for sure. And actually, to be honest, though, I felt like I was unbelievably confident in every area of my life as a 38-year-old until I became pregnant. And I lost a lot of confidence within that pregnancy because I was so worried about things going wrong. Where did that worry come from? Didn't come from me, so it was presented to me in different ways. The internet, that midwife, stuff that I was finding and reading, the fact that I didn't know anyone else that was a similar age to me. I had a couple of people that were having babies similar time as me, but both 10 years younger than me. And so it was really, my husband did a bit of that work for me. I still struggled to find, the confidence to say, I don't want to see that person again, because also I would have put myself to the side just to make sure that my daughter was okay. And that's the other thing, as we've touched on on this today as well, that we can't do that. You're not just a vessel for a baby that walks around for 10 months. It's so important how you feel throughout the entirety of your pregnancy. And again, because we are totally baby focused in our maternity care, everything is about that baby. Every time you go to a midwife appointment, it is about the baby. It's about checking that the baby's okay. Quite often, sometimes you as the mother birthing person, not even having a discussion about things. And that also, really contributes to not having the confidence to change things.
Yeah, and there is a lot of toxic positivity around that as well, isn't there? Where, when you have spoken to a woman that has a negative birth experience, people naturally say things like, oh, at least the baby's healthier, at least you got a live baby, just focus on that, and it makes you feel like guilty almost that you want to talk about your negative experience, or that you're not happy with the way things went. You've just got to focus on your live baby, and obviously a live baby is great, but you're also allowed to feel other things as well.
Totally. And I think that focus on the baby as well, like especially as you're talking about in postpartum, when you've got sometimes both parents are, you don't even need to experience any birth trauma to kind of feel slightly traumatized sometimes when you come out of birth. You could have actually a very positive experience, but it may be long, it may not have been anything like you thought it was going to be. Like, there's so much to process. Everybody comes around and is just like, oh wow, the beautiful baby's okay. Or, if you have had some complications, but is the baby okay? It's like, the baby's okay, but the poor mum is like ruined totally, like as in like, emotion. And that's such a good point, because we're just meant to brush that under the carpet. Oh, well, you've done it now. And then also the other thing is like, when we talk about, the experience, I've heard some people say to new mums, oh, well, you'll forget about it soon enough. You'll forget about it soon enough. And so, well, I don't want to forget about it, because it was the birth of my child, and I don't need to forget about it. Like, why would you ever want to forget about the most like monumental thing that's ever happened in your life? And also, it doesn't have to be the best day of life. I know for some people that the birth of their child was the toughest day of their entire life, and they would never want to do it again, but they would absolutely, they've had more babies and love their baby and that sort of thing. So it's again that dialogue. We're not quite being real about it. So there's no space for parents, both parents, to really ever be able to process it or have the support with, because we just need all births to be beautiful, regardless. They're either beautiful or they're heavily medicated, and that we have no in between. And I had such a wonderful conversation with one of my friends who I also work with. She's a birth worker who birthed her baby. She had a free birth after cesarean at home, and she described her birth as savage. And I said, but birth is savage, and we should be celebrating that and teaching people, like with hypnobirthing, on how to manage the savagery. Because we can cope with it. We just need support and an understanding of how.
Yeah, and this is it. I think there's a huge focus on making birth less savage, when actually I think more emphasis should be put into telling women you can cope with savage things. You are strong and you can do this.
Yeah, and I love that. I really love the word, because I think it's quite a strong, emotive, powerful word. It's, birth is primal. We've let go, all the things about us that are primal are quite savage, really, when you get to the nitty-gritty of it. And I think it's, especially for women over 40, kind of bringing it back to this convo, some of them aren't even allowed to have a conversation about the fact that they might want to have a natural but non-medicated birth. And that's also sad, because you can be in your early 40s and there's no reason why you could go for a beautifully savage physiological birth, and you can have that, but you just might have to work for it a bit harder. Finding the right people, like going to a class like yours or mine, and like having somebody fighting your corner with you can be really brilliant, helping to build up that confidence with you, signposting you to your birthrights, for example, because if you don't know them, you have none. Really being able to listen to you as you make your own decisions. So then when you go and relay those decisions to your healthcare team, you've already talked them through, you've talked them out. it's like having a little birth coach in your birthing team, however you decide to birth. We invest in a lot in other things like nutritionists or just on like personal trainers. Like almost everyone I know now has got an online PT, and they spend like quite a significant amount of money on that every month for health, which is great. But it comes to pregnancy and birth, and then we feel like we've got to do this all alone. And we never did, and we shouldn't now either. I feel like I could talk about this forever. I feel like I could talk about
Yeah, no, I am loving this conversation. I've just written down as a quote, beautifully savage. I love that.
Yeah.
I've just written that down. But yeah, just to sort of talk about like investment as well. It always grabs me that people will spend like thousands on decorating a baby's nursery that their baby isn't even going to use for 6 months. And let's be honest, lots of us aren't even going to use the nursery for like a year. Like your baby is more than likely going to be in your bed.
Or more, yeah.
Exactly. But if you could spend that money on like a hypnobirthing course or a doula or an independent
100%.
midwife,
Yeah.
those are amazing investments, particularly if you are looking to have a physiological birth with no medication. You're so much more likely to find someone that supports you if you put the investment in, which is really sad. That's a really sad state of affairs, but it's the truth.
Yeah, and it's life-changing, and I don't say that lightly. And I fell into this category. We spent more on our wedding than we did on the birth of our daughter. I would not do that now because I didn't know any of this stuff. I was oblivious to all of this stuff before I became mum. But how much does a wedding dress cost? Like, and look, I love weddings. I love everything about them. So I'm not saying like don't get married, don't spend money on weddings, but it's a weird thing that I think we find it hard to kind of work out where having a baby sits almost societally, because one of the things that I did when I was pregnant was told myself, well, look, I'm designed to birth a baby, so I'll just know what to do when the time comes. Because we do have an element of that as well, which I think also is quite toxic, because actually even years and years and years ago, when we were birthing babies in our communities, surrounded by other women, we weren't birthing babies on them. We had our aunties, our sisters, our grandmothers, great grandmothers, aunties, all there collectively, protecting and promoting that savagery, use that word again, because, we weren't doing it by ourselves. But over time, it's been like, well, we've tap into our capability to birth, but actually we've never tapped into it just completely independently, and we've lost that community. We've lost that. We're in such a different place birthing now, and again, it's about trying to educate people around that. Like, we've never done it alone. The takes a village. Like, we've all heard that. We all heard it. We say it, but we don't live it.
Yeah, and this was exactly my issue with my first birth, because I was exactly that mindset. I'd never done hypnobirthing, positive birth, anything like that. And I was like, do you know what? Women have been birthing babies for thousands of years. I'm just going to crack on. But what I didn't take into account is that women have not been birthing babies in hospitals for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And there are so many layers that now that I'm educated in birth and I do this, I now completely understand, and I understand why my first birth turned out traumatic and it turned out the way it did. But you don't know what you don't know.
No, you don't. And this is, again, like years and years and years ago, people would be telling stories of births and what they need, and this was a beautiful birth, and seeing them happen. This was the other thing. You'd be they were possibly even up until like I think like 40s or 50s, babies have been born in bedrooms at home. So it was happening around people. It was visible, and it's not now. It's behind blue curtains and closed doors, and a hospital is a very hard place for a brain and a body and a baby to birth. It's really difficult. We've lost it. We've lost that attachment. And it's people like us that are sometimes, I don't know about you, I feel like I'm screaming into the wind a little bit about it all. If just one birth at a time can be changed, then it ripples out. It will have an effect. And I feel like, just like perception is changing around older mums, we're having a bit of an uprising around how birth, really needs to be to unfold in the way that is healthy and beautiful and positive for families.
Yeah, and I think I love what you just said about birth. It used to be at home where everyone could see it and they could experience it. And, you know, as the older siblings, they would hear, you know, that the savage noises. Whereas now, for the majority of people, their parents will go away to the hospital and then come back with the baby. And it's just there, like presented like a, you know, like a slab of meat at the supermarket. And they're completely removed from that process. Yeah, and we need to find a way to normalize the birth process for children, I think, so that they grow up from day dot understanding what it is.
Definitely. And I think, you know, if hospital was the safest place to birth babies, we would have died out by now. We would never have got here. You know, and when you say that, sometimes I say that in my classes and people are like, God, yeah, you know, like we've been birthing out of hospitals for longer than in. And so, and of course, like it's so fine to birth in hospital. And many times we absolutely need to be birthing there and it's life-saving. And thank God we have everything that we have. But, you know, it's we've just moved so far from where we were. But I think, as I said, to leave it on a positive note, you know, there are so many independent birth workers now. There's so much support out there for you that's just outside your maternity kind of team, which absolutely have their place. You know, doulas are amazing. Hypnobirthing is a must. You know, if you put the effort into yourself, regardless of any age, it will absolutely pay off. And you're just much more likely to have that birth experiencing that you deserve, whatever that looks like. It's not always beautiful and, you know, serene with flowers and crystals, etc. You know, it's just whatever it is that you want it to look like. Does that make sense? I feel like
I completely get that, because we do see these lovely serene births on YouTube and on Instagram where they are kind of floating in a pool and it's dark and they're so quiet, and those are beautiful. But do you know what else is beautiful is when you get someone making those really primal, like roaring sounds. That's also a positive birth. That's also natural, serene, calm birth. You know, it doesn't look one particular kind of thing.
And also you can have that in hospital. I think this is the other thing, is when you actually look into what your body, baby and brain needs to birth, like once you know what it needs, you can give yourself that wherever you are. Sometimes you might have to work a bit harder. It's not easy to get lots of oxytocin flowing in triage, for example, but like when you're moved into your own birthing space, or even if you have to wait on a ward for a while, you are in control. You can create that environment to get to a place where everything is working the way it needs to work, because it's about taking responsibility for your own birth, like you take responsibility for everything else in your life. And you can have a beautiful experience birthing in hospital, but only if you are aware of what you need.
That's just it. You have to plan for what it is you want, and you have to prepare for that. And you also have to get your birth partner to prepare for that as well. Your birth partner is such a massive influence in that. Yeah. So we've been talking for nearly an hour now.
No, it's gone so quickly.
We have been talking for nearly an hour now. So I think that's time for us to sign off.
Yes.
So before we sign off, would you just like to talk a little bit about your services, and if someone would like to work with you and what you offer, how would they do that?
Wonderful. So if you wanted to work with me personally, if you are expecting a baby and you are in the East Kent area, then you can do that by visiting my website, which is heybabyperinatal.co.uk. But if you are somebody who is really passionate about birth and passionate about supporting parents and are looking into ways of being able to do that work for a living, and it is the most unbelievably fulfilling work, then you can train with my academy, which is the perinatalacademy.co.uk. We offer antenatal and early postnatal diplomas, which means once you have that, you're able to teach antenatal classes and support families. We also offer hypnobirthing add-ons. We've got baby massage and also doula happening this year. Before I go, I have to tell you about the team of educators that we have at the Perinatal Academy. They are absolutely incredible and some of the leading names in the UK birth world. So we have Emma Ashworth, who is leading voice for birth rights in the UK. We have AJ Silver, who is the founder of the Queer Birth Club. We also have Miles Lord, who's an activist for Black Birth, an award-winning coach. Every single one of us is a practicing birth worker. So we have lactation consultants, doulas, midwives, hypnobirthing instructors, sling consultants. There's quite a few of us on the team, but we're all practicing. So we live what we educate day in, day out. That's a big part of our ethos at the Parent Academy. And also you have access to all the educating team after you graduate. So when you graduate with us, you become part of the Perinatal Collective. And that is where you are able to get further training, any questions, as I said, access to people like Emma, Mars and AJ and myself and everyone else, place to cheerlead, because it can be sometimes quite tough running a business, loads of business and marketing advice and teaching advice. It's a really, really lovely community. So yes, the perinatalacademy.co.uk.
My goodness, what a lineup of instructors.
I know.
Wow, that's incredible. My goodness. Yeah, so on that note, well, before we sign off, if you had to give one piece of advice to in quotation marks, older mum who is just starting this journey, what advice would you give her?
My advice would be, as I said in tonight's session, look after yourself. So your own health is really, really important for many, many reasons. So, do try and eat well. Prioritize sleep as much as possible. Very hard if you've already got children. And I really hate it when people say that, because it's very difficult to prioritize sleep when you're already a parent. But ultimately, those things will really help you on your pregnancy journey if you are slightly older. And then the other thing to do as well is just look into those risks. If you're finding it complicated, get somebody to help you, so you can absolutely be comfortable with all the decisions that you make, agree to, or turn down.
Amazing. This chat has been absolutely mind-blowing. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you.
So welcome. Thank you.